Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I am Chris McEntee. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the American Geophysical Union. In the days following the 2016 U.S. elections, when AGU first started thinking about the need for an event like this, we struggled with what the frame for the discussion might be. The election of President-elect Donald Trump and the new members of Congress, along with his recently announced cabinet nominees, has introduced new uncertainties in terms of the strength of federal support for scientific investment, trust in science, and support for educating and developing the next generation of scientists. The landscape for science is shifting and uncertain. While AGU will always be a dedicated voice for Earth and space science and will fight for and defend science and the talented scientists who make it possible, there is more that now must be done, as you heard from Governor Jerry Brown just prior to this session. And that place starts here with you. So let us get started by introducing our speakers. First is Lexi Schultz, AGU's Director of Public Affairs, who will kick off our discussion with a quick overview of the post-election landscape, what we know, and what we might expect. Next is Daniel Kammen, a distinguished professor of energy at the University of California, Berkeley, and a science envoy for the U.S. Secretary of State. He will set our situation today in a larger context in terms of the connection between science and policy. After that, we have Katharine Hayhoe, winner of AGU's 2014 Climate Communications Prize, as well as an associate professor in the Department of Political Science at Texas Tech University and the director of the university's Climate Science Center. Katharine will help us to understand how we can frame science effectively for those we need to reach. And finally, we have AGU's own President-elect Eric Davidson. Eric is a biogeochemist and a director of the Appalachian Laboratory at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. He will take office as AGU's president in a few short weeks, and today he will provide an overview of what AGU is doing now and what we plan to do in the coming months and years ahead. Before we dive in, I just want to take a moment to encourage you all to use this session as an opportunity to tell us about your concerns and what you think AGU should be doing, and specifically how we can help you be those foot soldiers of science that Governor Brown called us to be. We are deliberately keeping our presentations as short as possible to allow the most time for discussion. We want to hear from you, we want to work with you, and we want to enable you to be able to amplify your voice and calling on you to be an active part of our planning moving forward. Please join me in welcoming our panel. How are we in?
I don't know, it doesn't matter. How you doing?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lexi Schultz. I'm the Director of Public Affairs at the American Geophysical Union, which is the body at AGU that is your voice to policymakers in Congress and the administration. I have been talking to many of you, and I know that there is a great deal of concern and anxiety about what the political and policy landscape means for science. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything, but what I want to do is talk about what we know for real versus what's speculative. And there are areas of real concern, but there are also areas of opportunity. So honestly, a lot of the areas of concern have touched on climate change. We heard a lot from Governor Brown. I know many of you have been having these conversations throughout these halls. We know that there are nominees who have expressed views that are inconsistent with the climate science. And I'm thinking about Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt, who's been named to be head of the EPA, and Texas Governor Rick Perry, who's been named to be the head of the Department of Energy. Each of these nominees are going to have to go through a lengthy Senate confirmation process, and this will give us an opportunity to weigh in, to ask questions, to bring issues up. And you shouldn't forget that. We also know that employees at the Department of Energy and the national labs have received a lengthy questionnaire asking about their work in climate and renewable energy, and some questions that are intrusive, like what associations they're a part of. But the Department of Energy has told their employees not to answer them, and they have the support from this current White House. So we will keep monitoring that situation. And we also know that there's been a great deal of talk about budget cuts, and that we're very concerned about science funding, again, particularly in the areas of climate science and earth science, but across the board. But for right now, all of science agencies are funded at last year's levels through April, and we have time to make our case. We also know that there are areas of real opportunity. So for one, the incoming administration has announced priorities such as infrastructure that are very dependent on science and will require long-term investments in science. And I think it's telling that during the campaign, the organization sciencedebate.org asked the candidates for their views. And one of the answers that was submitted from the Trump campaign said that they really support long-term investments in science. So we're going to capitalize on that. We also have a great deal of bipartisan support in Congress for basic research. And I'm thinking here of one particular person, the Republican chair of the House subcommittee that funds many of our science agencies, is Representative Culberson of Texas, and he is a very strong supporter of basic research. And there's a growing number of Republicans in both the House and the Senate who are speaking out about climate science, about the need for us to understand what's happening to our planet. There are certain areas of science that have generated a lot of excitement, space and exploration, and it's a chance for us to build connections through that kind of excitement and to really push those areas of science. And finally, the science community has allies in the business community and beyond that will help us make the case for our work. Now, there's a lot that we still don't know. That's a lot of speculation. What will happen to the Paris Agreement? We know that President-elect Trump has said that he wants to withdraw from that, but hundreds of businesses have urged us to stay involved in the agreement, and he's recently said that he has an open mind. We also don't know the nominees for many of our science agencies. NOAA, NASA, USGS. Will we have a science advisor, the director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and who will it be? And what are the priorities for those nominees? So we need to stay on top of that and watch who these people are and build allies where we can. And finally, we don't know what this administration and Congress will actually be able to do. The wheels of the policy process grind very, very slowly. There is a lot of chance for us to weigh in, and we should take those opportunities. So I want to just close my short remarks by making what I think are the two most important points. One, no matter what happens, AGU will be a strong advocate in the halls of power for Earth and space science. And two, your voice matters. You can talk to your policymakers, your elected officials, and you can do this through email, phone calls, visiting in your home states and districts, coming to DC. There are many, many opportunities, and it's a chance for you to make the case about the value of your science. What does it mean for public health and safety? What does it mean for the economy, for national security, for your community, your state, our nation, and the globe? Now, for those of you who are doing that already, I say thank you. Please keep it up. Please encourage some of your colleagues to join you. And for those for whom it's not appropriate or just not comfortable, please share your stories with AGU so that we can be your voice. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan, I guess.
Dan, we'd like you to go next, please.
Well, thank you all for being here. And I just want to echo what I think is the most important element of what you just heard, and that is that there's very diverse paths to engagement, and that's the most critical story. Doing the best science, basic, applied, or otherwise, is the foundation for what Governor Brown said, and that's the truth will win out. And you have to keep pushing on that, which everyone does in their day jobs, but this larger mantle of communicating the power of science, engineering, technology, economics to people at all kinds of levels, I think one of the key lessons. And so in my position at Berkeley, both as a faculty who works on clean energy access in developing countries and how to transform power systems to be as clean as they can be around the world. My lab runs models of the power system of the US and China, but also smaller countries, Chile, Kenya, a variety of places. What we see and what I experienced in Marrakesh, my 16th straight COP meeting, was that every step that the U.S. makes away from that mandate of what the science and engineering opportunities are is not holding back the progress of science, and it's not redirecting the global story. It's simply leaving good jobs and economic opportunities on the table for others. And if this president-elect wants to step away from economic leadership, then that would be, in my view, foolish, but it doesn't get in the way of what everyone here is working on. And so when you go to the meetings that took place in Marrakesh, where the Chinese delegation laid out opportunity after opportunity from regional to global clean grids, where the delegation from Dubai announced the lowest price energy project installed anywhere in the world last year, except for energy efficiency, of solar at under 3 cents a kilowatt hour. And then people wondered about it, and they turned around 3 months later and announced a new round of bidding that came up with solar at 2.54 cents. I just felt like this is the MC Hammer moment. You can't touch that. Those are winning numbers, and stepping away from that is leaving jobs, political leadership opportunity, ability to sell U.S. products overseas. That would be an incredibly foolish move. That opens the door for the kind of things that I hope people in this room take on. We know that even in places like California that has a very well thought through climate policy, we are going to work incredibly hard, and we'll struggle to meet our 2030 goals, our 2040 goals, our 2050 goals. That means the bigger measures, even in this seemingly dark time for science, like advocating clearly for a carbon price. That's something that if we don't put on the agenda, lots of smaller measures just don't add up to enough action. Carbon price is not something that Mr. Trump has embraced, but his choice for Secretary of State has advocated as the head of his company that a carbon price is the way to go. So I think that's one of those levers you have to push. Now, in my opinion, not because he's not smart, but Rex Tillerson, in my view, is a inappropriate and incorrect choice because of the conflict of interest you have of being the CEO of a major oil company to then become Secretary of State. But that said, opportunities like his stated support of a carbon price, that is a door that needs to be pushed on. The fact that that Rick Perry has presided over both a large oil and gas boom in Texas, but also a dramatic and cheaper push for wind power, those are doors that need to be pushed on. They're not the whole story, but those are the elements that where the fight needs to take place because there's so many opportunities. And again, the thing I said in the beginning is what I'll close on, and that is we have now seen countries around the world. Bangladesh is now the leader in high-quality construction and recycling of batteries for solar. Kenya is a country that is now thinking about a dramatic shift from hydropower-based economy to wind and geothermal. Morocco has a more aggressive clean energy standard than does California at 52% of their energy mix in 2030 than we do. So we will up our game in California to overcome that one in a friendly competition. Those are the areas where the rhetoric about climate denialism and all these retrograde sort of foolish parts of thinking come to direct interface with what you all are working on. And the science, the engineering, the engagement of these things in policy opens the door to something that I don't believe that a even halfway intelligent, populist, pro-jobs president-elect could turn away from. And so I think all the ammunition's on our side, but it's going to take a lot of fight, and this is the time to step up just the way the science engineering community did when President Bush came in, and the states got a massive amount done despite a huge amount of obstructionism from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much.
Right.
My name is Katharine Hayhoe, and I'm a climate scientist. So I wake up every day, as many of you do, to the realization that the topic I study has become one of the most politically polarized topics in the entire United States. More polarized than gun rights, immigration, and abortion. I never thought I would see that day. But we know that a thermometer is not Democrat or Republican. It doesn't give you a different number depending on how you vote. We also know that science does not require belief. Whether you believe in gravity or not, if you step off the cliff, you're going down. So as scientists, our instinct, when we hear these loud voices asserting that the science that we have spent so many years and even decades carefully constructing, when we hear these loud voices, our instinct often is to say, we need more scientifically literate people. We need more information. We have a lack or a deficit of knowledge. But some of the biggest advances, I believe, in our field have been made in the social sciences over the last 10 years. And the social sciences show us that the more scientifically literate people are, the more polarized they are about climate change. And the social science also shows us that when we divide people up, rather than viewing them as people who say yes or people who say no, when we divide people up across the spectrum into the 6 groups that the 6 Americas of global warming uses, the group of people who are truly dismissive, who would dismiss any piece of evidence that they are given, including, as I often say, brand new tablets of stone from God, from an angel saying global warming is real. That group, as loud as they are, represent a very small proportion of the population, averaging around 10%. What is the real issue? The real issue is when we ask people, how much do you care about climate change? How much do you prioritize it relative to other issues on which you vote? The answer is climate change comes in near or at the bottom of many people's lists. The issue really is that people don't care because, first of all, they think it's a long-term problem that doesn't matter to me where I live. Or second of all, they think it's an issue that really only matters if you're a bleeding heart tree hugger. Or they think it's a matter that somebody else will take care of for them, like the government. What we have seen in the last 4 weeks is truly extraordinary. We have seen, and when I say we, I mean many of us in this community, many people in nonprofit organizations, many people at the AGU, even Scientific American. What we have seen is a tremendous rise in concern. All of a sudden, somebody else is not going to fix it for us. And we have seen a rise in concern slowly also over the past 5 or 10 years as it starts to dawn on us that this thing really is affecting us in the places where we live. Where I live in Texas, I normally think of it like this. You know, this is normal weather, and then this is Texas weather, and then along comes climate change, and it's becoming even more extreme. So I spend a lot of my time talking to people who climate change is extremely low on their scale of priorities. They could be water managers, they could be city planners, they could be farmers or producers, they could be Christian college students. And when I first started talking to people, I would come in and I would start with the science, and I would continue with the science, and I would end with the science. The number one thing I have learned is that for the majority of us, again, there are dismissives, and those people are very vocal, but they are a small percent of the population. The main issue with most of us is not a head issue, it is a heart issue. We have not connected our heart to this issue. So what I do when I talk to people now, and every single one of us can do this, I talk to people with whom I feel I have a genuine concern or value in common that I share. And then I begin, whether it's a conversation with my neighbor, or whether it's talking to a group, or a bunch of school kids, or even colleagues, I begin by connecting on the issue that we both have a common shared concern over or value. And then from my heart, I share why I, as a scientist, am concerned about our shared value. And then there's a little bit of science in there. Of course, I am a scientist, and so are most of us. But then I always bring the conversation around to exactly what Dan just talked about, is the amazing inspirational solutions that are already happening today. The fact that in Texas, 15% of our energy is already wind. The little town of Georgetown in Texas went 100% renewable because it was the cheapest way to get their energy. Fort Hood, the biggest military base in the United States, just signed a new contract for wind and solar because they saved taxpayers $168 million. Even Uncle Joe, who's all geared up to tell me that there's more polar bears now than there were in 1960, even Uncle Joe can't object to the Army saving taxpayers' money. So as scientists, we are people who, when we're given information, we change our minds. But we have to recognize that we are quite different than most people, and that's what makes us good scientists. But when we're talking about whatever science it is, science can and should connect to the heart. If I can connect climate science, which is about as esoteric as you can get, an increase of 1 degree Celsius in the global mean temperature of the planet, to people's hearts, then surely whatever science you do, you can also connect to people's hearts. But don't just connect it to their hearts in terms of it as a terrible problem that we can't fix. Connect it in the sense of, yes, there is a concern, there is a problem, but there are amazing solutions, and let me share some of these inspirational solutions with you. How do we do this? There's a whole spectrum of engagement. And where we choose to fall on that spectrum is entirely a personal and individual choice that we should respect in ourselves and in others. We need scientists who continue to focus entirely on doing good science. That is what we do. We need scientists who are willing to talk to people about it. And if you're one of those people, consider signing up for Climate Voices. It's almost like a speaking bureau, so to speak, from UCAR. If you're somebody who prefers to analyze and write, check out Climate Feedback that peer reviews popular media articles that mention climate change. If you feel that civil engagement is essential to protect the sound science, consider talking with UCS, the Union of Concerned Scientists. They are there to protect sound science, as is the AGU. As scientists ourselves, though, we need support. Somebody asked me in my Facebook chat for our Global Weirding video series last week, they said, do scientists have a support group? I said, yeah, the support group is AGU. There's also other support groups like the Earth Science Women's Network and the Climate Scientist Legal Defense Fund. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and together, let's take care of every single person on this amazing planet on which we live. Thank you.
Eric.
Thank you, Katharine. Well, she's such a great communicator, and she just, as we were waiting to come up onto the stage, she gave me a little nugget of communication that I hadn't considered before. You know, I've actually been president-elect for 2 years now. We have kind of a long gestation training period. You know, people joked about whether it's congratulations or condolences. But what Katharine said to me is, well, you know, given the turn of events recently, you're sort of in the position that Churchill was in 1940.
No pressure, Eric.
Yeah, so, you know, this is going to be easy, you know. But it's so much easier, so helpful to know that we have so many talented people working with us, and also to have received such a wonderful pep talk as we just did received from the governor, to let us know that he, among lots of others, have our backs, and I think that's really important. But in addition to a pep talk, he gave us marching orders, and some of those marching orders are kind of mundane, like be the good soldier that keeps producing those papers that are really important and be truthful to that. But we can also, I think take inspiration from him in that he said he has fun doing what he was doing. It was pretty obvious he was having fun, wasn't it? And we have fun doing what we do, and we are as passionate about what we do in our science and doing science as he is about being a politician and doing politics. And so I think we're from a pretty good position of strength to start out with. You know, the term resilience has for quite some time in the field of ecology had an important scientific meaning. And it's becoming used more and more in terms of discussing about climate change. And when you think about resilience, it's not something that just happens overnight. It's something that is part of a network, part of a long-term effort. And fortunately, we're coming into this new situation after having already done a lot of the groundwork. And let's not forget that. So I'm going to list a few of the things that AGU has already been doing that sort of puts us in a position of resilience. It's not enough. We have to step up our game beyond that. But let's not forget that there's already a lot that we can build on. For instance, our Public Affairs Office has worked very hard in producing a Geosciences Caucus on Capitol Hill. Bipartisan members of Congress who are interested in the geosciences. And we've been working on their awareness of how important it is, how important support for it is, and to provide them, for us to act as a resource for them when they need more information for convincing their colleagues or whatever it is that they're doing. So we already have that. Also, the Public Affairs Office last year put me in touch with Representative Cubello from Florida and Representative Gibson from New York, both Republicans from districts that are directly affected by climate change. And they have convinced a dozen or so of their colleagues from their party to sign a statement about the recognition that climate change is real, it's caused by humans, and that there are things that we could do about it. And they stopped there because they didn't want to go further into saying, well, what should we do about it? Because they need to first build the consensus that, yes, we agree that there's an issue. And what we did from AGU is said, you know, we have members from every single congressional district. And as you're trying to convince or bring on board some of your colleagues, many times the messenger that has the most impact, particularly in a political sphere, is somebody from back home that shares some of those values as to what's important to you back home. So as I look forward in terms of a strategy for AGU, I think we need to call it a 538 strategy. And that we're not talking about just California. Oh, that's great to know that the governor of California has our back. But we need to develop that understanding of the importance of geosciences in all 435 congressional districts with all 100 senators. And, oh yeah, the 3 more from DC. I think we got that one. But that needs to be our overall strategy. And not just federal representatives, but also the state and local. And AGU is already doing things along those lines as well. Part of the ability to do that is for all of us, well, maybe not all of us, many of us, those of us who feel comfortable doing it. Just as Katharine said, you know, each of us has different skills that we can bring to this, and some of us are going to feel more comfortable than others. But certainly for those of you who are interested in building those skills, our Sharing Science program has programs in which we come together and learn how to make an ask to our congressperson, how to communicate with our local state representative, or somebody on the local planning board. You know. And we have those resources in AGU, and we're going to be stepping that up and making them more available. We have this coming year, we are having a Climate Science Day in Washington, D.C., and another one in the fall called Geosciences Day. I've participated in those in the past. I learned a lot from doing that. And it put me outside my comfort zone. But, you know, we're in a time that we all need to be outside our comfort zone and contributing in other ways. So I would encourage anyone who's been on the fence or even hadn't been thinking about it to start thinking about that. Now, specifically, we've done certain things post-election. For instance, we coordinated with a total of 28 scientific societies to produce a statement about the importance of the new administration identifying, appointing a science advisor, someone through whom we can communicate and collaborate. And we've also led a drive for creating a petition, and so far we have about 7,500 signatures. If you haven't signed it, I'd ask you to take a look at the change.org website to see it. It's the petition to, again, encourage the Trump administration to appoint a science advisor. You know, that's not as sexy as the firebrand talk that Governor Brown gave us, but it is an extremely important thing to do. So, in addition to those things that we're already doing, which kind of build some of that basis for the resilience, we need to step it up a few notches. And one of the programs that is in the process of being stepped up, it now has something like 41 different projects in localities, most of them in the US, but some of them internationally as well. We call it the Thriving Earth Exchange. And that's linking scientists with particular expertise that is in need by local communities that have identified particular problems that our science can help them solve. And in the process of doing that, we generate narratives about how important our science is, because those projects demonstrate how it influences people's lives. Just one example is, for example, in the Front Range of Colorado. You know, flash flooding is a really important issue, and back in 2013 there was a tremendous flash flood that caused a great deal of damage. Well, one of the text projects is linking the scientists that do the models to use the data from the gauging stations and the rainfall stations to generate flash flood predictions, put it into an app that the Larimer County Office of Emergency Management can use to direct the first responders. That's a narrative about how important our science is, in this case at a very local level. We need to replicate that across the country, and not just on the coasts. We need to replicate it in a 538 strategy. Now, along the way, I think we will be partnering. We are already partnering with private sector, and we need to partner even more. Because we need to find those voices that are trusted voices in every state and now in the federal government. And in some of those cases, it's going to be a private sector person who has more of an access and more of a way of getting that audience. I can think from my own examples of having done research in human impacts on the global nitrogen cycle. When I go around and talk to people about how many teragrams of nitrogen here and there that humans have altered, you know, eyes kind of glaze over, and, you know, what's a teragram? And yet we've found that working with scientists from the fertilizer industry and private sector consultants, that much of what we can talk about of how we can improve nitrogen use efficiency can be passed on, and that farmers are seeing those people as their trusted sources of information. But we share the values with those messengers. And so we'll be looking for more and more opportunities to work, to partner. You know, it's wonderful to have that pep talk from Governor Brown and that fire talk thing of standing up for what you believe in and all that. And we can't back down from that. But we also have to look for building bridges as well and finding ways to get others to help work with us. And that brings us kind of to a point that I think everyone here made, in that we're going to develop a storybook. I don't know if we're going to call it that. This is still early stages, trying to figure out at AGU how we're going to exactly do this. But we need to build that storybook, and all of you need to contribute to it in one way or another. It may be traditional storytelling, it may be some sort of very innovative using other media. But we need to make sure that our members have the tools, the facility, the the platform in which we can all benefit from each other's and build up that camaraderie and enthusiasm to tell our story. Because if nobody cares, which is basically not nobody, but not enough people care, how do you get more people to care? You tell them stories as to why they should care. And so that's where we're going to step that up a few notches. We have, we're really fortunate in the American Geophysical Union that we have an extremely talented staff and we have resources that we can devote to this sort of thing. And I know that our board and council are very much dedicated to that effort, and that's what we're going to be doing. I'd like to mention one more thing, is that I'm aware that another impact of the election is that there are a number of people who are feeling more vulnerable as a result. Questioning, because of what transpired in the campaign, questioning whether inclusion, diversity is still going to be something that they can count on as something that is part of the scientific endeavor. If there's going to be anything there that is more threatening than has been in the past. Well, again, I want to build on the fact that we have a lot of resiliency. You've noticed that a lot of AGU staff have this safe AGU green button on. We did this. We planned this before the election. And we had our town hall meeting on sexual harassment last year. We have 9 such events here this year. And so we're not starting from scratch on that. And we're part of a bigger civic society that has shared goals. And as the governor said, there are going to be times that we're just going to stand up for these things. And we're not going to let anyone make a place that we do science, whether it's our classrooms, whether it's our laboratories, our field camps, our ships. We're just not going to tolerate that any of those places cannot be a safe place for science. And that transcends 4-year election cycles for sure. So I think we ought to move on to Q&A, but I would propose that instead of the traditional Q&A, we also consider Q&A and S, and the S is storytelling. So if in addition to having any questions to us, anyone would like to start out the process of, it has to be a brief story, start out the process of, a story of how your science makes an impact on people and how that can be communicated, be it to a local water manager or a member of Congress. So thank you very much for your attention, and I really appreciate that we have such a great turnout, and that too is a great harbinger of hope that we're going to be working on this together. Thank you very much.
So we're going to open this up now for your questions and your stories, and while you're coming to the microphones, I'd like to tell a story if I could. So often in my role, I have an opportunity to go speak to a lot of audiences that actually have no idea what the American Geophysical Union is, and their eyes glaze over. So about a year ago, I started out by saying, how many of you checked your weather forecast this morning? How many of you in the past year flew over the poles? How many of you assumed that there was clean water when you turned on your tap this morning? And I went over a series of things, and I said, all of you have benefited from an Earth or space scientist. And with that, and they said, what do you mean? And I was able to say, well, do you know that our space weather and looking at what the sun does is how they determine where they fly planes, over the pole or not, because of the impulses that can come and create increased radiation for pilots and the passengers. And I go, and somebody had to figure out how to make what was in that water supply and how to clean it up to be able to give you clean drinking water. And we're seeing that in Flint, where people didn't take care of that. And it was AGU scientists that actually helped them raise that alarm. And the whole thing, and it's scientists that tell you how good the weather is every day and whether you know to wear a raincoat or not. And with that, I was able to connect. So we want to hear your stories, but I just wanted to give you a few minutes of things. And I'm not a geoscientist, and if I can explain it, I know you all can do a lot better than even I can. We'll go to this mic here. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Andrew Rosenberg from Union of Concerned Scientists. And if you work at UCS, you get very used to people coming up to you saying, "What are you concerned about?" Well, I've been doing press interviews for the past week, and now everybody's saying, "What aren't you concerned about?" So it's a nice change in that way, although very nerve-wracking. I just wanted to say that we and many other groups, including I know AGU and other science societies, are really preparing to develop watchdogging of this administration to look for misuse, abuse, or suppression of science. And we do need the science community to be deeply engaged in that effort. It's not as if we will know on every issue, and this is not just about climate, of course, where there are those kinds of abuses of scientific integrity. So we do need a very broad community to work with us or work with other connector groups to really bring those issues to light. And as the panel has said, make sure that we're not just saying this is an abuse of our science, but we're bringing it home to people in terms of the real impacts that has when science is misconstrued or suppressed. And then finally, I'd just note that tomorrow we're continuing this discussion at the Marriott in the Golden Gate Room at 12:30. Dan is going to be there, has agreed to join us to continue to talk about how scientists can be engaged in this process of being responsive to what comes from a new administration. Thank you.
Thank you. Go to this mic over here, please. Please introduce yourself.
My name's Carl Gable. As far as work, I'm the group leader of the Computational Earth Science Group at Los Alamos National Lab. And as far as, I'm pretty much an optimist on things and sort of figured everything would work out, but it was definitely a gut check to sort of, in the last week, sort of hear sort of the response to DOE and national labs. In terms of question and story, I mean, the story is, I mean, I still work with people that I, on my lunchtime bike ride with, that are climate skeptics, that work in the high performance computing area at Los Alamos National Lab, where climate models are run all the time. So I talk to people on a personal level about that, but I guess the concern I have, and would like to maybe hear some of your comments, are two areas that I didn't really hear you addressing. One is the media and what seems to be the changing landscape of the media, because as scientists, we maybe have our voice and we write our papers, but our papers are not read by the general public. The general public consumes their information through the media, whatever label you want to, whatever venue you want to say the media is, and that landscape seems to be changing. Also, sort of the truth-based science or decisions based on accepted consensus and truth, where the media these days does not seem to, they have an agenda, whether it's entertainment or just their backers are using the media as a venue to voice their opinions, rather than the media being something objective in the center. I guess my question is, can you comment on truth-based decision-making or science, where we tend to think of consensus in science as being sort of arriving at the truth, and where that sits in the media and how we can communicate with the media and with the public in the what seems to be changing landscape?
Sure. All right, thank you. Katharine, I think we'll toss this one to you to start. And then could I ask those that are at a microphone, please try to keep your questions very short. We're running out of time, and I want to make sure we can get to as many of your questions as possible.
Thank you for that question and comment, too. The fact that when we open up our browser, we can see one article that is nearly completely accurate and another article side by side that is entirely inaccurate is a continuous source of frustration to many of us and serious concern. That is why, for example, climate feedback, which I mentioned before, is so important, because it actually takes these media articles and through the donated time of us, peer reviews them and checks them. So if you're interested in doing that, check them out. But I would say one more thing. If on the spectrum of engagement, we are willing to speak to the media, it is incumbent upon us to make sure we know how to do that. Because we are trained to speak of complexity, to respond to questions with 20-minute explanations, and to abhor sound bites. And that is exactly the opposite of clear communication with the media. We need to be able to boil something that is incredibly complex down to simple terms, speak in a soundbite, and respond concisely and briefly. So if you want to be someone who speaks publicly about this, look at the training the AGU has. Look at the training the AAAS has. Ask your university's communication department if they have training, because just about all of them do, or even have somebody who's willing to sit down with you one-on-one and help you through it. And then toss your hat out there. Tell your university or your institution you're willing to talk to people. Engage on social media with journalists and writers. Because people are looking for our voices, and if you're willing to do it, absolutely do it, but make sure that you do it well.
Dan, you wanted to
Yeah, I mean, I think something to add to that, and I agree exactly. I think that this storytelling and this being very human, the idea that science can only make a statement when there's 99.99% certainty is we know something that works against getting the scientific discussion into the public. And it's clear, we're now seeing narratives of scientists who's tried to stand up in the Flint, Michigan case, into arsenic in India, into the lack of energy access in developing countries, that we knew enough to act earlier on, and all of the tenets of peer review and the process hold us back. And I don't mean be less accurate. What I mean is be an honest human being. We have good knowledge on this. We expect the direction to continue. Here's where the work is going on at national labs, at community groups, at citizen scientist group in Netherlands, et cetera, et cetera. But here's where the science tells us to go as individuals. And I think that's a way to engage with the press that is both more human, more real, and will allow somewhere in the back you to tell that longer abstract or paper version, but to really do the direct version. I think that's what Katharine said about the stories. You know, bike riding with a climate denier, that's part of this dialogue, and I do see that worldwide. And the thinking that we are waiting for absolute certainty before you can speak, I think, has held back this community in a lot of dangerous ways.
Yes. Okay, we're going to go to the far right here, and then we're going to come to the middle here.
Great, thank you. Ariana Settengrier. I'm at University of Maryland and NOAA. I was at a conference last week, a Community on Ecosystem Services, ACES, and interestingly, we came to the same conclusion, that we haven't been always doing the best job of storytelling about ecosystem services, and that we need to do a better job of that. And I was really excited, Katharine, to hear your point about, finishing with some of the amazing progress. I think what's hard for me is, as I talk to different audiences, I would love to be able to connect on that more local level, but I move around and I don't live in all these places. I'm wondering if there's a role that AGU could play in helping us pull together those amazing stories so that people in this community and outside could put in those amazing stories, and then if we're traveling to an area, we could figure out what's going on there that we might want to point people to. Because at the moment, that just means me Googling everything, which, is time consuming, and I might even run into fake news, and, it's hard. So I'm wondering if there's a role there for that inspirational, amazing piece that the society could help us with.
So I'm so excited to hear you say that, and you heard Eric say that we want to do that. We have collected some, but we need a lots more. And
yes.
We need a better way to make it also easily accessible for all of you. So as Eric said, we don't have it all figured out yet, but we are going to be spending some time in the next few weeks figuring out how we really enable that and contribute to that. So please stay tuned. And I know, we send you lots of emails, but please look for the emails and communications so that we can make that available for you. Let's go here, please.
Hi, my name is Tuba Askan-Haller. I'm a professor of geology and geophysics at Oregon State University. And I've liked what I've heard from this panel regarding the fact that we need to get better at communicating our science to the public, to the press. I would argue, though, that part of the reason we haven't been good at that is because, and I would argue that part of the reason we are where we are is because we're not good at that. But I would also argue that the reason why we're not good at that is because that skill is truly actually not valued in the academic system within which we are living. So our promotion and tenure processes are essentially based on publications, proposals, all of those things. And all of the work that you're talking about right now usually makes up, 5 or 10% of somebody's position description. So I would argue that it's really important to have a very close look at this archaic system, academic system within which we are living, that is not only holding us back from communicating our science to the public, but it's also holding us back on making progress on many other issues, including issues of diversity, for instance. So is AGU thinking about this, or thinking about playing a leading role in actually examining the value system within which we are living, and whether or not we're going to start making some changes around that, and not ask our young faculty members to do more, which is essentially what you're doing, but instead ask them to do things differently and value them for that.
You want to take that, Eric?
Sure.
I can
Well,
take
I
it too.
can say that in my own institution, we are re-evaluating our system.
As AGU, though.
All right, I'm going to get there. But you know, you have to have success stories, and you have to have experiences. And what AGU can do then, I think, is then spread the word on those experiences and success stories. We do have a program of heads and chairs that we do offer this kind of discussion and training, talking about these sorts of issues. And more we're moving towards trying to make sure that interdisciplinarity is recognized in our honor system, in our ways of affiliating. We're considering some major changes in our static affiliation of 23 sections and focus groups. Not that they're going to go away, but other sorts of more informal types of affiliation that we can do that will promote and give recognition to that kind of activity. Actually having the effect back home on an individual university's tenure or promotion process, that's probably something that's, it's going to require a lot of hard work over a sustained period. But I think it's entirely within the purview of societies like the American Geophysical Union to bring that forward and to focus on it and to say, here are the advantages of including service as part of your promotion purview.
And I will add one more thing. That's precisely why several years ago AGU created an award called the Ambassador Awards that's offered every year, up to 5 recipients. We're going to get a chance to honor the Ambassador Awards from this year today at the ceremony. But what's really important is that award is for individuals who are exemplary in service, communication, leadership, outside of the traditional scientific leadership. And what's even more important is that they're conferred fellows. So it gives them a really very distinguished importance and relevance. It's not enough. We have a lot more to do, but that is an area that we're trying to do, at least for that, to be able to recognize that in a very meaningful way. We have time, I'm sorry, for only one last question. But what I want to say for all of you that are at the microphones and those of you that have questions but haven't had a chance, we're going to go right to you, sir, right? Because you've been waiting a long time. You can please send any questions you have. You can send them to AGU Executive Director at agu.org. We will make sure you get them answered. We will make sure if you're asking for requests to connections to resources or whatever, that we will do that. And you don't have to think of it as a one-time offer. You can continue to do it on a regular basis.
And Chris, could I add? Also, I'd invite you to look at our most recent From the Prow post. If you go on the AGU website, it's featured there on the front page. It's a post that we put up last night, and it's on this topic. It starts telling a few little stories. It's basically couched as an open letter from one president-elect to another. And I'd love to have your feedback as to whether you think it's sending the right message. So please give your feedback.
Thank you, Eric. I forgot to mention.
One last 10-second thing on this is that tenured faculty and department chairs can actually make an immediate impact. You don't have to wait for a cycle or a generation change. We see in NSF applications now, they take much more seriously what's the communication outreach aspect. Giving junior faculty postdocs credit for doing those things is something that no one has to wait for. Departments individually craft the letters that go out for tenure, the materials they send around. You can really highlight a broader picture than the narrowly defined service within a individual field. So it's really for us to make that change immediately. It's not something that has to be waited for.
And okay, the last question, please.
My name is Jonathan Friedman. I'm Senior Research Associate in Space and Atmospheric Sciences at the Arecibo Observatory, Director of the Puerto Rico Photonics Institute as well. Actually, my point is that there are 3.5 million of us in Puerto Rico, almost 4 million worldwide, who are unenfranchised U.S. citizens. And, of course, Puerto Rico is often referred to as the United States version of Greece. But where there's crisis, there's opportunity. We have 25 cent per kilowatt hour energy costs. And I would like, for example, the work that Dan does, the work that other people that in this community that work in energy to see that opportunity, and within the United States, we can start to apply those things. Mm-hmm. I think there's an opportunity to reach a broader community, the Latin community nationwide in general through Puerto Rico. So that's my, I guess, small story.
Okay. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking the panel for their... And let me reiterate the commitment of AGU to really amplify what we've been doing in the past and to work with all of you to create this opportunity of uncertainty and fear and anxiety into one of incredible opportunity for all the disciplines of Earth and space science. Thank you very much.